Hi, everyone. So let's start with a simple recognition game. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of the following tragic event from news coverage. Hurricane Harvey. The terrorist attack against Charlie Hebdo magazine in Paris, France. Massacre in Baga, Nigeria. So if you haven't heard of that event, you're not alone. I didn't hear about that event myself until almost a year later. So I only found out about it by reading about another article about a terrorist attack in Burkina Faso, a country in Africa, on a website called the Long World Journal. The Long World Journal is not a mainstream website. In fact, it's published by a think tank. In contrast to going through all the hoops to learn about this event, the attacks in Paris that went along with Charlie Hebdo and the Charlie Hebdo attack itself were well covered and easy to access. This imbalance, however, becomes quite glaring when you consider the death tolls. It's possible 2,000 people died in Baga versus 17 in Paris. That's quite a difference. We also see this imbalance with how natural disasters are covered. Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Maria both hit American soil, yet Hurricane Harvey received far more coverage. It's estimated Hurricane Maria killed more than 2,000 people, yet Harvey ended up getting more coverage. If you still don't believe me, I have some graphs to show. The graphs come from a website called Media Cloud. Media Cloud is a website that is jointly run by MIT and Harvard University. So clearly these are people who know what they're talking about when they're discussing media analysis. So the red represents Paris and how their terrorist attacks were covered for sentences per day. The blue represents Nigeria. Nigeria is almost a line. It's not really there. This represents stories per day for various hurricanes. As you can see, Hurricane Maria gets a lot less coverage than most of the other hurricanes. This also compares sentences per day for Harvey and severe flooding in South Asia, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. As you can see, barely any of the events outside of Harvey are getting substantial coverage at all. Some are barely getting any coverage. This last infographic shows deaths per 33 stories. Each icon represents 33 stories. So essentially, in South Asia, a single death generated 33 stories. In Harvey, a single death generated more than 2,000 stories. That's quite a difference. So why is there this imbalance? It's possibility racism plays a role. The American newsroom is not very well known for its diversity, so it's possible that because there's a lack of Hispanic journalists in American newsrooms, that Maria was unfortunately seen as more of a being in a Hispanic issue. It's worth noting the Hispanic language outlets in the United States covered Maria far more vigilantly than most American outlets. Another factor might be how much an event is expected. The flooding in South Asia I showed with the infographic is unfortunately quite common due to the monsoon season. Severe flooding in Houston is not. Therefore, journalists may be more inclined to cover events that are seen as unusual or surprising. The last factor might be how much journalists can relate to the victim's culture and how far the victims are away. If the victims are American and are nearby, they might get more coverage due to human nature. It's worth noting, though, that consumers also play a role in this. Consumers, understandably, are the customers of the news media. So the news media is going to try to tailor their needs to them. If they're not going to read about certain undercover tragedies, why would editors bother to cover those stories? A good example is with how The Guardian magazine covered bombings in Brussels, Belgium, and Lahore, Pakistan. Both were essentially front page news. However, the Brussels bombing live updates on the Guardian website received far, far more attention from consumers. Therefore, the Guardian editor wondered why they should even cover stories like Lahore. So it's clear that consumers play a role in this too and may be affected by the same biases journalists have. So besides ignoring victims, there are some other serious consequences I would like to share of this. One is the possibility of holding the powerful to account. A good journalist is someone who holds powerful figures to account. With Hurricane Maria, when the hurricane first hit, it was estimated that around 60 people had died. However, when a later study was released, it was estimated that more than 2,000 people had died, which is quite a difference. Had the media been more vigilant about this, they might have questioned more about how both the Trump administration and the Puerto Rican government were giving a highly positive view of how their aid was going to Puerto Ricans. Another factor might be what the director of the media cloud, Ethan Zuckerman, calls the clash of civilizations narrative. Essentially, this narrative he was using this to describe a potential bias that could develop from only covering the terrorist attacks in France. Essentially, the clash of civilizations narrative is an Islamophobic narrative in which the Western world is pitted against the Muslim world, which is trying to get rid of the Western world's freedoms. This, if you only covered France, this might seem to be more valid because, in particular, the Charlie Hebdo attack was an attack against a satirical newspaper which had published a parody of Muhammad, Islam's founder. Understandably, the Islamic extremists who attacked the magazine were not happy about that. However, in Baga, co-religionists were slaughtered by Islamic militias. So it's clear from this that Muslims can be just as much of victims as Westerners can be of terrorism. So what can I do about this? Even if you read a little bit about an undercover tragedy, if you can, you might be able to push coverage a little bit by creating more demand for such stories. I'm not perfect about this myself, and no one is perfect. However, as Ethan Zuckerman said, honor every death. We certainly should. Thank you. Oh, okay. Okay.